always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Pakistani soldiers killed by Americans on Pakistani soil. In a swift and angry reaction, Pakistan's government closes critical NATO supply lines into Afghanistan. Increasing tension, raising this central question. Is Pakistan able, in fact, is it willing to help the Americans achieve their goals in Afghanistan?
You know, you can't kill your way to success inside of Afghanistan. It takes a negotiated settlement. I'll tell you, any solution in Afghanistan is going to take a regional approach. And Pakistan is absolutely imperative and has to be a part of that regional solution.
But Pakistan's now boycotting an international conference meant to hammer out and update plans for the American handover. The American General William Caldwell, he's responsible for training those Afghan forces to take over when the Americans leave in 2014. But after a recent UN report detailing allegations Afghan forces have been abusing detainees, many are wondering, will Afghan forces be ready? In what shape will the Americans hand over the country? And are the Pakistanis really helping or not? We sit down with General Caldwell to find out. Thank you for talking to Al Jazeera, General Caldwell. You're responsible for training of Afghan forces, aren't you?
I am, that's correct.
Are we on track? Are they going to be ready to take over in 2014?
People ask me that very often, obviously since I've been on the ground there for 2 years. And what I can tell you is absolutely. By December 2014, the Afghan security force, the police and the army, will be able to take the lead and be responsible for security inside of Afghanistan. Now, it means the international community remains engaged in supporting them. And it also means the government of Afghanistan continues on its track too. But if both those occur, then their forces will be ready.
There are some worrying trends, though, that have continued for a while. General Egon Rams of ISAF is on the record as saying that around 10% of trained army soldiers, Afghan army soldiers, go missing. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it?
Well, you know, and again, if you just look around the world at any armies that exist in any part of the world, everybody has some level of attrition where when the numbers, where they get eliminated from or they depart from the service of that army. And what we're finding within the Afghan army, we're growing this thing so rapidly right now. 70,000 in the last 2 years have been added into the army.
Is it too rapid?
No, it's about right at the right pace. We worry very much about the quality. It's a top concern of ours. We don't want to just grow quantity, we want quality with it. But we think we're moving right at about the right pace to put them in position to develop and be ready to take over by December 2014.
The same general, Egon Rams of ISAF, also says 15% of soldiers are drug addicts. 15% are drug addicts, 10% are going missing. That's about a quarter of the force. That's more than what you would normally see in any other army, isn't it? There's a real problem here.
Well, the first thing we ask ourselves, are we bringing in enough new recruits every month that are enabling us to make the growth that's required to get them to their level of 195,000 by October of next year? And the answer is we are. There's over 8,000 recruits that come and join the Army, that want to join the Army every year.
It's not just about numbers, surely. It's about quality of...
It is. And the thing that's been good about these increasing numbers that want to join is that we're able to screen out very early on a lot that are unacceptable. We find, because everybody gets drug tested, that they in fact come in on drugs, that they're underage, that they can't physically be acceptable, and also some are coming up biometrically now when we screen them through our Afghan national database as having something in their background that says, don't let them come in. Last month alone, we turned away 1,600 young men that wanted to join the Army that we said, sorry, you're, for various reasons, can't come in. We still have enough coming that we'll use them instead.
But he's talking about soldiers which have gone through that, which have gone through the training.
Yeah.
Leaked US diplomatic cables talked about 60 different incidents of what they call green on green. Afghan army soldiers fighting with other Afghan army soldiers either because they were high, they were drunk, they were having an argument over cards.
Well, you know, we look at those very closely with our Afghan counterparts, and one thing we have found in a vast majority of those It's what we call combat stress. These young men have been exposed to 30 years of war, and a lot of times the way they settle disputes is through force instead of through dialogue. And so we work very hard at helping them understand that although you have lived in a very traumatic situation for many years in your country, especially under Taliban rule, the conditions have now changed, and when you have a dispute between each other, the best way to handle that is through dialogue. But
so despite all of that, you still think you're happy to say that these guys can take over the country after 2014?
I am, but and the reason I say that, again, is because of the growth that's occurred. You know, as we've seen real progress in how they're continuing to grow and develop, but we've also seen a real professionalization start to take place. We're not just now growing a force, but we're actually bringing into it qualities such as values and ethics and professionalization, and most importantly, education that was not being taught just 2 years ago.
But when you look at the situation, there still are problems with rampant corruption at almost every level of Afghan authority. Drug production has increased since the days of Taliban rule. Warlords even more empowered than during Taliban rule. And the current government is mired in allegations of election fraud. Can that situation lead to stability when you leave?
Yeah, the two key things have to take place. One is you have to build a professional security force, police and army, that does in fact serve and protect the people of Afghanistan. And we're well on a glide path to help set those conditions by 2014, December 2014, for that to take place. So that's the security side. Over on the governance side, you're right. What's going to be really important in 2014 will be their national election, the transfer of power between the current sitting president and whomever wins in 2014, for it to be a fair and open election, and in fact the transfer of power occurs in a
But not only that, but ending corruption, ending warlordism, and surely international forces carry some of the responsibility of that transition process. Are you happy with that? What sort of Afghanistan will the US leave behind?
Well, what I can tell you is that there is an ongoing awareness and effort to help reduce the levels of corruption that have creeped in for so many years inside of Afghanistan. It's not eliminated by any means, and it still is going to be a challenge for some years out there. But the key thing is people are addressing it. They're taking action about it when we see it. We, the Afghans, and the international community. So that we start bringing that level of corruption down.
Are they really taking action? I'd like to refer to an incident here. The Afghan authorities only on October 11th shut down a corruption investigation into a former Kapisa province governor, Ghulam Qawis Abu Bakr, who we understand US officials, you guys, were hoping would be one of the first high-level Afghan officials to actually face some justice. Are you happy with a development like that?
Well, obviously, any time you find anybody corrupt, you want to see a thorough investigation done and appropriate action taken based on that investigation.
So you're not happy with the fact that they shut down the investigation on October 11th?
What we want to see is a more transparent, we the international community see a more transparent, open process that takes place into these investigations, and not allow political patronage to come into it, so that in fact the people of Afghanistan can have confidence in their government.
So what would you be doing then to encourage Afghan authorities to reopen that investigation?
Well, I think what you'll see is obviously the first thing that always occurs is behind the scenes discussions and dialogue with the Afghan leadership, rather than do it openly out in the public initially. And then with time, if pressure needs to be applied for whatever reason, then that's normally when you see more.
Time is running out, isn't it, General? I mean, it's 10 years of the American presence there, and we've got some kind of exit date now, haven't we?
Well, you know, I would say there's been a concentrated effort by the international community for the last 2 years. Before then, you know, the focus really was from the international community outside of Afghanistan over in Iraq. But starting in sometime in 2009, the international community started putting the right resources and the people and the strategy in place to really start helping the Afghan government and their security forces move forward.
Is it just a case of that you've only started to focus lately on Afghanistan, or is it a case, as some suggest, that the US is making a mistake currently by working with, in some cases supporting warlords accused of drug trafficking, accused of human rights abuses. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you, anytime there's any allegations of, any kind of abuse that occurs, that in fact it's unacceptable by the international community and by the Americans. And so that's not something, and our Secretary General of NATO has been very clear about that we, NATO, and also I've heard it from the United States, do not tolerate and will not accept working with those who have been associated with any kind of detainee abuse or anything of that nature.
If that's the case, then, General, allow me to ask you why U.S. Special Forces have worked and continue to work with Police Commander General Abdul Razik. He's the police commander in Kandahar. He's been accused of involvement in drug production, corruption, the killing of civilians, the killing and torture, or the torture rather, of 2 teenage boys in 2006. Why are you working with this guy then?
Well, what I would tell you is there's an ongoing investigation into those allegations that is taking place right now with Razik down there in Kandahar. Everybody is very much aware of that and concerned. There's been dialogue at the highest levels with the Afghan government about this. And again, the key thing that takes place is one of the first things General Allen did when some of these allegations came out 2 months ago from the United Nations was he immediately stopped the transfer of any detainees that were in the international control to those particular locations that were identified in that report.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about that UN report in a minute, but coming back to the issue of Abdul Razik, pending that investigation, is it business as usual?
No, in fact, there's been quite a bit of additional overwatch and awareness that's taking place in the international community, with a tremendous amount of discussion between us and the international community about that situation in Kandahar.
So at this point, is he something of a persona non grata for U.S. forces to be cooperating and working with so many allegations around him until they're cleared up one way or another?
There are certain things that I know the international community is not doing with him right now in that location, but in those areas where he still needs support in order to help protect and serve the people of Afghanistan, there is still international assistance going to him.
So there is a bit of a contradiction there then, that you need to give him help to carry out one job even though there are a lot of questions around him. And do you see where people are coming from when they say, so are you guys ready for human rights in Afghanistan or not? You need to take a stand either way.
Yeah, and you'll find that the international community is firmly in the court of, we absolutely support human rights inside of Afghanistan. It's absolutely imperative. It's going to be critical for the government to embrace it too as it moves forward for the people of Afghanistan.
Then why not cut out people like that and say right now, here and now, just say, we are not going to work with this guy anymore?
Well,
if you are 100%.
And again, well, there's an investigation ongoing against these allegations, and the outcome of that investigation will determine exactly what actions will be taken in terms of how they will or will not work with him in the future.
You mentioned there the UN report about detainee abuse in Afghanistan. Did international forces know that detainees which were being captured by international forces and handed over to local security forces, did you know that local security forces were mistreating detainees before this report came out, before you suspended handovers in July?
Well, it's two parts there. You know, the report also encompasses more than just the security forces. It talks about the National Directorate of Security, right, where the vast majority of the allegations are against. And that element we in fact do not work with, and we don't have partnership with them from the coalition side in terms of what they're doing. But in the facilities that were in fact identified, as you know, we immediately stopped the transfer any further detainees. Had we known. When
you say immediately, General, you're talking about in July, correct?
The report was made available about 2 months ago to the commander there of the International Security Forces in Afghanistan. And once he read through these allegations, he immediately directed the immediate cessation, the stopping of all further prisoner transfers, detainee transfers, to those facilities.
But my question is, surely everybody knows that detainee abuse exists in Afghanistan. Surely before the 2 months ago, you knew that when you hand over detainees to Afghan forces, a lot of them are going to get abused.
Well, what I tell you, it's almost the exact opposite. There are a lot of cases where, in fact, they're being treated properly, and detention is being done exactly as it should be. There's a vast majority of those, in fact, taking place, and that, you know, the amount that we're identifying in this UN report is a very small segment of the overall element that we actually work with on a daily basis.
The UN report references 46% of detainees which it interviewed. That's a pretty high percentage for detainee abuse.
Well, again, I go back. Most of this was about the National Directorate of Security, who we do not work with. We're talking about those that the police forces that we work with in Afghanistan, and we have oversight. If we see and observe an inappropriate act, then in fact it is reported, and appropriate action is taken on behalf by the international community.
But my question is, then, you knew that detainee abuse was going on even when you were handing over people to local
No,
civilians?
in fact, we would not.
You never knew in Afghanistan. I mean, people know since the days of Barbara Kamal there's been.
Well, if we have concrete information, you know, factual, where we've had the presence of being able to see and observe, or we've investigated and found that some kind of detainee mistreatment was going on, we would in fact have immediately taken action in those areas that we're working with and the people with whom we're engaged with.
But when you were handing over to units, people over to units, local units of Afghan security forces, those units you were handing people over to, prior to these allegations, you had no idea that detainee abuse was going on in Afghan prisons? And
again, in the prisons, the police prisons that we work with, again, we monitor things fairly closely. And again, we're very open with the independent organizations that come in and do these assessments because we want to be transparent in our accountability for us to the international community too, and how we operate. So if there had been reported cases and we've been able to verify anything, then we would have in fact immediately stopped engaging with and dealing with that particular element or organization.
How many of the detainees have been compensated?
I'm not sure. I really haven't delved into all the issues associated with that part.
I mean, clearly that needs to be done, doesn't it?
Well, in fact, there's documented cases.
The UN's documented them.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of, I don't know what has been done by the Afghan government or by the international community in terms of following through now with...
Wouldn't you care to do that yourself? I mean, as a senior member of the international forces there, and you're trying to hand over this country in a good shape, right, to local forces, isn't that something you'd really want to get into and make sure is going on? There's accountability, there's compensation, there's...
And I think all of us would agree, as an international body, that's the right kind of approach that everybody should be taking. I just don't have the particulars as how they're following through from this report. I can tell you that there are ongoing investigations, each and every allegation that's in that UN report, and as they either are able to substantiate or not substantiate the allegations, you know, then the follow-on action will be taken behind that.
However, if we could shift gears maybe a little bit, as you're training Afghan forces, however well you train Afghan forces, can you really make security to prevail in Afghanistan without bringing Pakistan on board to the sort of arrangement which will exist once you leave?
I'll tell you, any solution in Afghanistan is going to take a regional approach. And Pakistan is absolutely imperative and has to be a part of that regional solution.
Do you think Pakistan is on board?
Well, there's an ongoing dialogue, and there's a commitment by very senior military leaders that understand that to find a solution for this part of the world, it's going to take all the neighbors to be involved. You know, you can't kill your way to success inside of Afghanistan. It takes a negotiated settlement, not only with the insurgents, but with the entire international collective body in that region of the world being involved and having a stake in it, because they can directly influence and help bring greater stability.
The reports I was reading say that cross-border attacks on US forces from Pakistani territory have increased dramatically since the killing of bin Laden in May. Do you think there's any link there?
You know, I wouldn't want to draw that conclusion. You know, I know from our dialogue with senior Afghan or Pakistani officials with our Afghan counterparts, when we have these trilateral talks between the international community, Afghanistan and Pakistan, that the senior leadership in Pakistan is committed to helping find and come to a solution.
Some of these attacks are launched very close, according to these reports, from Pakistani military positions or the frontier corps positions. Do you at least suspect the Pakistani authorities are maybe even turning a blind eye to the activities of these armed groups?
Well, what I would tell you is that if you listen to the former senior military official in the United States, you know, he in fact said the ISI there in Pakistan has been helping support
the Haqqani network.
The Haqqani network, some Taliban elements that are currently operating along the border region, and obviously that's of great concern. But again,
so yes, you suspect they may be turning a blind eye and letting these.
Well, again, I don't. You know, I think we've all want to know and clearly are trying to find just how high up perhaps people within the Pakistani leadership know. But we know down at the lower level, as laid out by, you know, Admiral Mullen, that the Haqqani and the Taliban were being supported to some degree by the ISI.
How would you characterize Pakistani role and support for these armed groups? Is it an obstacle that is preventing you from achieving your goals in Afghanistan? Does it go that far?
No, you know, again, the goal that we want to set is to enable the Afghan security forces to be able to handle the level of insurgency that exists inside of Afghanistan. And so, however we can get the Pakistani government to help and assist in that effort is very, very important. Again, I go back to a regional solution is the only way that Afghanistan is eventually going to be brought to greater stability and security in that country.
I understand, General, but my question is now, how do you characterize their role? Do you see that the Pakistani role is an obstacle to you achieving your goals?
The ISI has been an impediment, a deterrent from enabling the force, the Afghan security force, to progress as rapidly as it could. But again, nobody has made any kind of inferences that it goes up to the senior level of the government.
Is it still worth your time trying to pursue peace negotiations with the Taliban after the recent series of killings of top Afghan officials, including the former president?
You know, again, we take our cue, we the international community, off the president of Afghanistan and the government of Afghanistan and how they want to proceed forward. But what I will tell you throughout history, the only way insurgents elements have ever been brought to a table for reconciliation is eventually through dialogue and discussion. So some form of dialogue and discussion will eventually have to take place. We can kill insurgents all day long, but that will never win the war. It's going to take a negotiated settlement at some point in time.
And a final question, what U.S. military presence then do you see in Afghanistan beyond 2014?
We'll still be there as long as the Afghan government wants us to be. We'll be there in a role of providing trainers still. We'll still be in a role of advising and assisting the Afghans. You'll see support forces, you'll see intelligence support. You could very well see some sort of counterterrorism element still there to do strike operations with the Afghans. You'll see some sort of Air Force element there to provide close air support for the Afghan forces. So there will still be some support elements who can advise, assist, and train. But the combat forces will all be gone.
General Caldwell, it's been good talking to you.
Thank you very much.